All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Land of Chem. I am your host and the author. My name is Jeffrey Drum. Thank you all so much for joining me again. This is episode 5, the Esoteric Symbolism of the Scarab and the Apis Bull. I am very excited to be making this particular video. The material that I will be discussing today is some of my favorite contained within the narrative of the Land of Chem. In my opinion, it's some of the most interesting and compelling. So without further ado, we will get right to it. Just a quick reminder for those of you that are interested that limited first edition print copies of The Land of Chem are now available on my website. The cover of the book is made to look like papyrus. There is purple metallic foil stamping on the front and back cover. The interior body pages of the text are orchid colored. I am really, really proud of how this book turned out. It's a really beautiful print edition of this book. So if you're interested, my website is www.thelandofchem.com. Visit the website to pick up your copy today. All right, in episode 3, I discussed the function of the step pyramid and its use to produce methane gas. And I do believe that the chemistry and the knowledge of methane gas production is an ancient science that permeated all of the civilizations across the globe in the time frame surrounding the end of the last ice age, so circa 10,000 BC. Again, the time frame I utilize in the book is around 7,000 BC, where the pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization is utilizing their knowledge of chemistry within the Egyptian pyramids for the production of chemicals on an industrial scale. So today, we're going to be discussing the connection of the symbolism of the dung-rolling beetle, the scarab, and the deification of cattle by all of these ancient civilizations, and the connection of those two symbols to the production and the chemistry involved in the generation of methane gas. So again, here are just two images of the symbols that we'll be discussing today. On the left here, you have the sacred bull. Again, it's very, very well known that cattle are sacred animals in many of the ancient civilizations across the globe. And then you have here on the right, the sacred dung-rolling scarab beetle of the ancient Egyptians. As with any great esoteric symbols, there always exist multiple layers of interpretation. And typically, with these symbols, there involves a religious or spiritual interpretation of the symbol, which is intended for the comprehension of the general public. And there's often a deeper, more significant esoteric interpretation to the symbol that is intended for those that have been initiated into the sacred mysteries. And in this case, the sacred mysteries involve the knowledge of chemistry and the production of chemicals on an industrial scale. So let's take this alchemical drawing, for example. I could assure you that there is, again, sort of a spiritual allegory, this transmutation of the spirit type interpretation of this symbol. But the chemical definition of this symbol, this is actually a chemical reaction process. Now, you have several symbols here in this image. The green lion represents ferrous sulfate, and it's also known as green vitriol. And the sun here represents gold. Now, in this particular image, this gold has been dissolved in a solution of aqua regia, which is nitric and hydrochloric acids. The combination of those two acids together is enough to dissolve gold into solution. And the ferrous sulfate is utilized to precipitate or drop that gold back out of that solution so that you can then produce a very, very pure metallic gold. So again, this is the green vitriol, the green lion, grabbing the sun or grabbing that gold out of the solution. So again, there could be a spiritual or religious interpretation to this particular symbol. But again, there's also that deeper, more significant esoteric interpretation, which is connected to the science of chemistry. And these symbols actually represent chemical elements. And this could very well be considered a depiction of a chemical reaction process. So again, let's keep that in mind as we discuss the esoteric interpretations and possibly the lost interpretation of these symbols. To give a preview of the two symbols that we'll be discussing today, I was very excited and a little bit surprised to find this particular piece of material that I'll quote here in just a minute. But I just wanted to give an introduction to the background, of the conventional definitions of the interpretation of these two symbols. Again, the deification of cattle and the symbol of the ancient sacred scarab beetle, the dung rolling beetle of Egypt. And I have never anywhere in my research come across any other literature that associates the use of cattle manure being used to produce biofuel or methane. So this is, again, a very, very exciting revelation that I discovered when I was preparing for this video. Again, this is from a website called www.worldatlas.com and in articles regarding the animals of ancient Egypt. So again, just to give you an idea, again, it's pretty well known that cattle are considered sacred animals across the ancient world. And again, here, cattle were very important in the daily lives of the ancient Egyptians. Milk, meat, horns, hide, etc., were obtained from cattle, and they were prized possessions of the people in the region, leather, etc. So very, very useful animals, right, in agricultural and domestic applications. So of course they were considered sacred animals because they were very, very important to these ancient civilizations. So again, there's that surface interpretation that is intended for the consumption of the general public. But I believe that the true reason for the deification of cattle is connected to the, again, chemistry of methane production and the generation of this extremely useful, vital chemical that I do believe was utilized in all the ancient civilizations across the globe. So again, very, very surprised to find for the first time that anyone else had connected the use of cattle manure for the production of methane gas and the ancient Egyptians. So I was very surprised to see that. And again, just an introduction to the scarab beetle. So among the ancient Egyptians, the scarab beetle occupies a special position. The scarab beetle exhibits a unique habit of collecting animal dung, rolling it into a ball, and laying its eggs on the ball so that when the larvae hatch, they can immediately access food. The ancient Egyptians associated the nature of this beetle with the sun in the sky. As per the ancient Egyptians, the scarab beetle or Khepri would renew the sun each day and then roll it above the horizon, carrying it through another world to renew it again the next day. So within the ancient dynastic Egyptian religion, they utilized the symbol of the scarab beetle to represent the solar cycle. So the rising and the setting of the sun in the sky. And I remember hearing this explanation as a kid, and it never resonated to me whatsoever. And I questioned if the Egyptologists had the correct understanding of this symbol. It just never made sense to me that the ancient Egyptians would connect the magnificent, radiant, glowing golden sun with a ball of poop being rolled across the desert floor by an insect. Again, this never really made sense to me. And it wasn't until I started researching the material for this book and connecting the science of chemistry and methane production that I began to realize that the symbol of the scarab could also have a much deeper esoteric interpretation, again, that was never intended for use within the spiritual or religious context of the religion, but it was intended for initiates who had been initiated in the sacred mysteries of chemistry that would understand the connection between the scarab beetle and the production of methane gas, which we'll get into here in just a little bit. Okay, so methane in the ancient world. I just wanted to share a little information to prove to you that methane was well known in the ancient world. And this is in the conventional archaeological and historical records. So I'm not saying anything that's completely out of the blue. And it's no stretch of the imagination that the ancient Egyptians would have also been aware of this chemical. So China was the first country in the world to discover and utilize biogas. And this is just from this particular website. Again, we'll see some dates in the subsequent slides that prove that methane was discovered much earlier than 100 BC. But nonetheless, the historical data can be traced back to the Western Han Dynasty around 100 BC. So China actively exploited and used naturally formed biogas for many fire wells. So this is the nomenclature that they were using to refer to these natural gas deposits as these fire wells. So we'll talk about that fire in just a minute. In many, many places throughout these provinces, later in the period, marsh gas produced from the lakes of et cetera, were discovered and utilized as fuel. So again, the ancient Chinese were utilizing this chemical for many applications, both industrial and domestic. So natural biogas was widely collected with, for example, bamboo tubes. They use these rudimentary bamboo pipelines to transport methane gas for use in cooking, lighting, iron smelting, military use, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is just some historical evidence that methane gas was known about in the ancient world. And we're going to get a little bit further into that mystery in the next slide. So methane in the ancient world and the sacred flame. So again, the sacred flame is one of these esoteric symbols that we see kind of across the board in these ancient civilizations. And there is of course, spiritual, religious interpretation of this sacred flame imagery as related to the awakening of the soul within the physical body, the ignition of that divine consciousness. But I do believe, and there is some historical evidence to prove, that the sacred flame symbol is also connected to chemistry and methane gas. So in around 1000 BC, and I found this very interesting, I stumbled across this again when I was putting together the research for this video. In around 1000 BC, the famous oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece was built where natural gas seeped from the ground in a flame. So somehow this methane gas that was coming up out of the ground had been ignited, and there was this mystical flame coming up out of the ground. So again, this sacred flame symbol also being connected to methane gas and chemistry. This article says that around 500 BC, the Chinese started using crude bamboo pipelines to transport gas for, again, many miscellaneous applications. Now, this secondary article down here at the bottom says that the first known observations of natural gas seeps were made in Iran prior to 2000 BC. So again, there's historical evidence that says that methane gas was known about before 2000 BC, so well within the time frame of the dynastic Egyptians. And these gas seeps, probably first ignited by lighting, provide the fuel for the eternal fires of the fire-worshiping religion of the ancient Persians. So again, we clearly see that this sacred flame was an important spiritual and religious symbol. Again, an interpretation that was intended for the general public, but there's also a connection to chemistry and methane gas. And a little bit more information about that. So these types of springs became prominent in the religions of India, Greece, and Persia. Unable to explain where these fires came from, they were often regarded as divine or supernatural. And in the book, and kind of in my literature and videos in general, and I talk about this in, I believe, the second video on Alan's channel, Sacred Geometry Decoded, where we talk about the magic of these ancient civilizations and how magic could have been misinterpreted by the uninitiated as something supernatural or divine, when in fact it was actually science and the practice of chemistry. There's a great quote that says, "Any technology significantly advanced is indistinguishable from magic." And again, the knowledge of chemistry and these chemical reactions to the uninitiated would have appeared to be magic when in fact it was actually a chemical reaction. So it wasn't around until 500 BC that the Chinese discovered the potential for the use of these fires for their advantage. There's evidence that the Chinese used natural gas in certain regions for, again, miscellaneous purposes. I found this last part very interesting, that they also used to make lamps using methane gas, and documents from the period maintain that a lamp prepared with methane gas would remain useful for an entire day. So again, I found that very interesting, the ways that these ancient civilizations were utilizing methane gas. And again, in the first degree, I explain how the step pyramid was utilized to convert cattle manure and the raw materials into methane gas on an industrial scale by the pre-dynastic ancient Egyptians. Okay, so what is the connection between the deification of cattle and the production of methane gas? And I think I've probably clearly explained that already. So cattle manure contains the essential anaerobic bacteria that initiate the chemical reaction process that produces methane gas. So your raw materials in the chemical reaction process are cattle manure, agricultural scrap material, and water. And these three ingredients are mixed together to create a slurry. The slurry is introduced into the step pyramid, which is a large central methane digestion chamber. And within that anaerobic environment inside the chamber, the anaerobic bacteria from the cattle manure again create a chemical reaction process called anaerobic digestion, which produces methane gas. So again, if this ancient civilization was utilizing the cattle manure, which came from cows, to produce this incredibly important sacred chemical, it would certainly make sense that cows also became a sacred animal. And again, you can see in the symbolism of the dynastic Egyptian religion that cows were an important animal and a sacred symbol within the religious context. But I do believe that the true esoteric interpretation of this deification is related to chemistry and the production of methane gas. Okay, a little background on the deification of cattle in the ancient world. And again, cattle were sacred animals to all of the ancient civilizations across the globe. And I believe that the justification for this deification is connected to chemistry and methane gas. But again, there's also sort of a conventional interpretation for this symbolism. So due to the multiple benefits of cattle, there are varying beliefs about cattle in societies and religion. Particularly in India, cattle is known as a very sacred animal. Now, cattle are considered sacred in many of the world's religions. Cattle also played important roles in many religions, including those of ancient Egypt, Greece, ancient Israel, Rome, and ancient Germany. So again, we see that conventionally across the board, cattle are sacred animals. And this is just from a Wikipedia article on cattle in ancient religion and mythology. So let me give a quick definition of how cattle were symbolized and utilized within the ancient Egyptian religion. Again, these esoteric symbols will always have a spiritual or religious interpretation. But again, I do believe that there is a deeper connection as related to chemistry and methane with this symbol in particular. So in the ancient Egyptian religion, bulls symbolized strength and male sexuality. They were associated with aggressive deities such as Montu and Min. Some Egyptian cities kept sacred bulls that were incarnations of divine powers. So again, we see that connection to divinity and supernatural experience associated with these sacred animals, but that could also be a correlation to the science of methane gas, the production of this sacred flame also being a divine power. So I do believe that there is a connection there. Cows were also connected with fertility and motherhood. There's also cattle involved in the Egyptian creation myths. Also, representation of the sky was sometimes envisioned as a goddess in the form of a cow. So we also see, again, kind of that astrological interpretation of cattle and cow within these ancient religions. But again, I do believe that the true justification for the symbol is connected to chemistry. How do I explain the connection between the deification of cattle to the production of methane gas within the step pyramid within the context of the Land of Chem? And I really can't say it any better than to quote myself in the book. So this is directly from the first degree. Now, as a query is learning about the operation of the step pyramid and how this cattle manure is utilized within the structure, he starts to reminisce about his apprenticeship and some of the lessons that he learned. So Query was well versed in the chemistry of methane, having first been introduced to it during the early stages of his apprenticeship. He witnessed the incendiary properties of this extraordinary substance in laboratory demonstrations of combustion reactions and was taught that the monumental achievements of his people in Egypt were built upon this fundamental organic compound. Aquari had also learned that cattle manure, being vital to methane production, was the true reason his people regarded cows as their most sacred animal. So again, that's a direct quote from the book that pretty much sums up my explanation of the deification of cattle as connected to the production of methane gas. So next up on the agenda is the symbol of the scarab beetle, the sacred dung-rolling beetle of the ancient Egyptians. So I think you can immediately see what direction I am headed in here in terms of the connection of the sacred scarab in regard to methane production. So here's just some background on the scarab symbolism in the dynastic Egyptian religion. So the scarab in the ancient Egyptian religion was again utilized to represent the solar cycle, the rising and the setting of sun, and the god Kepri rolling the sun across the morning sky into the horizon. It was also seen as a symbol of rebirth and regeneration. So, again, a very prevalent symbol within the ancient Egyptian religion mythology. But I do believe that the true purpose of this symbol is connected to chemistry and the production of methane gas. So this is just a picture of a page from Initiates of the Flame, which is a great esoteric book written by Manly P. Hall. And it was one of the first that I kind of got introduced to in my journey through the esoteric realm. And he talks about the symbol of the sacred scarab in this book, again, to kind of throw it back to the discussion of the sacred flame being an esoteric symbol that could possibly connected to chemistry. This book is called Initiates of the Flame. So again, I think there is those multiple layers of interpretation encoded within this manuscript also. So the sacred scarab, in this form, the ancient Egyptians worshiped Kepri, the rising sun, and the sacred scarab was buried with the dead as a symbol of resurrection. For as the sun rises from the darkness of night, so the divine spirit rises from the body that is no more. The life is eternal. So again, there is that spiritual religious connotation associated with this symbol. But again, I always found that a very dubious interpretation because, again, the sun is the glory of the day, and we have this insect rolling a ball of poop across the ground. So the interpretation of that symbol within the dynastic Egyptian religion context never made sense to me, and I never felt comfortable with that. Then I started investigating the production of methane gas. And of course, before you can produce that gas, you have to collect your cattle manure. So just as the scarab is collecting the dung from which its young were born, again, I'm jumping ahead here to the next slide, that is exactly what happens in the production of methane. Okay, so how do I define the symbolism of the ancient sacred dung rolling beetle, the scarab, within the context of the land of Chem? Here's a quote from the first degree of the Land of Chem that explains the esoteric symbol of the sacred dung rolling beetle, the scarab, as connected to the science of chemistry and the production of methane gas. So, as the harvesting season ended and the flooding began, the annual methane production cycle would commence. The agricultural waste and cattle manure raw materials were collected from throughout Egypt's farmlands and regularly delivered to the pyramid throughout the summer, a process that became symbolically represented by the sacred dung rolling beetle, the scarab. Just as the scarab collected the dung from which its young were born, our ancient brethren collected the cattle manure from which this essential chemical was created. So, again, there is a practical explanation for the symbolism of the sacred scarab as related to the collection of the cattle manure that's involved in the production of methane gas. And again, with these great esoteric symbols, you of course have your spiritual or religious interpretation that was intended for the general public. But again, with these symbols in particular, as with all esoteric symbols in general, there is a deeper layer of interpretation, which is intended for those initiated into the sacred mysteries, and in this case, the sacred mystery of ancient chemistry. All right, so that basically sums up my explanation of the connection of the deification of cattle by all of these ancient civilizations and the symbolism of the scarab beetle within the dynastic Egyptian religion. Again, I believe that the symbolism of the ancient scarab and the deification of cattle predates the dynastic Egyptian civilizations. This knowledge of chemistry and the active use of the pyramids to produce chemicals came before the dynastic Egyptian civilizations, and these symbols were reinterpreted and repurposed within the dynastic Egyptian religion, again, as astrological and deity representations, and again, symbols of the solar cycle. But again, I do believe that the true meaning and generation of these two symbols is connected to chemistry and methane gas. All right. Again, for those of you that are interested, pick up your printed copy of The Land of Chem today. These are limited first edition print copies, really, really beautiful editions of the book. And I'm very, very happy with how these turned out. So please visit the website to pick up your copy today. And thank you guys so much. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I do find this material to be some of the most interesting. I'm a huge fan of esoteric symbols and imagery and the interpretation thereof. So this is very, very exciting material for me to be discussing. Of course, there's a lot more behind all of this. I haven't revealed all of the secrets yet. So stay tuned. We have a lot more coming down the line. Of course, if you liked the video, please give it a like. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Land of Chem YouTube channel. Of course, my website is www.thelandofchem.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram at the Land of Chem. Please visit the website to pick up your limited printed copy of the Land of Chem today. And stay tuned. I have some really exciting videos coming up next. My next one will be on the function of the bent pyramid. Very exciting stuff. So thank you all so much. And until next time, stay tuned. We'll see you guys.